So thanks for coming. This is my second webinar on the nutrition guide and how to use it. And today we're going to be focusing on food lists. It's a great technique that I'm going to go through. In terms of what I'm going to be looking to cover today is what the food list is, about the design of the food list in the nutrition guide, the key 4 stages of how to coach the food list. That's including completing the journal, a food list assessment, a food list plan, and continuous tracking. At the end, I'll take time to go through the advanced food list, which I sent you guys in an email. And then any questions that you've got for me, guys, I'll happily answer them at the end. So first, we're going to focus on what the food list is. Now, the food list is simply just a breakdown of all the food and drinks and possibly supplements that you want your clients to eat. Now, I'm a massive believer in a positive food list. And the reason I phrase it as a positive food list is because we use the food list to encourage clients to eat for their goal. So we're not talking about this as a food list of foods that we want people are good and bad. It's just purely and simply the foods that we want to encourage on a daily basis or on a weekly basis for our clients to consume that we know is going to help them towards that goal. So that could be any goal. So that could be someone if they've got a weight loss or a fat loss, or if they want to improve their health, or even if they want to improve their fitness. The foods on this list will support any way, and this is the way I would coach it. In terms of how you can use the list, there's 2 ways. You've got both an educational and a practical. The educational way is actually sitting down with your clients, using it, helping them to understand the benefits of these foods, how to combine these foods, and in what levels. In terms of a practical way, that is actually using the list from a client perspective. When they're trying to plan their meals or when they have to select their foods, they can use it as a reference tool. Or it could even be a way where you will sit down and coach. So actually have demonstrations on how to combine aspects of the food list to put together their plan. Now, the food list strategy and the techniques you coach, who would be best using this? In terms of what we would call this, I would aim this at what I would call an intermediate client. An intermediate client is someone that is doing majority of the things right most of the time, but they're still not hitting their goal or their results are starting to slow. So this is where you might need to go into what I call a micromanagement scenario where, yes, the person is consuming 6 portions of vegetables per day, but what is the balance of those? Is it heavily, all 6 not very starchy? Are they like potatoes, carrots? Are they always of that form? Are they not getting a balance from the non-starchy side of it? So are they not consuming onions, broccoli, dark leafy greens? So it's way that you have to go into the details of what someone's actually having to help coach them to that next step. So it's kind of the way I'd use the food list technique is a way to push people to their next goal marker. Focusing on the second type of group of people, which is someone that might not have gotten with the guidelines. These are people that if you have coached them like to have 6 portions of vegetables per day or 3 portions of protein per day, but they're not just quite getting it. They're not doing it on a regular basis. So what the food list can do is provide a direct a level of guidance to these people. So what you can do is coach them what type of vegetables they're having. So rather than saying, can you get an extra portion of vegetables in your breakfast, you would more likely say, well, based on these vegetable choices you identified you love mushrooms, how about we add mushrooms to that omelette that you're having for breakfast in the morning? So it's a little bit more chance to get direct guidance, and these are the sort of people that might benefit from it. So I would call these are the type of people I'll call guideline non-responders. So someone that doesn't respond to a particular coaching strategy that might need an alternative. In terms of when you could use this technique, so there's 2 times this technique could come in. So the first one would be after an assessment. So you still go through the assessment phase, and I'll go through this later, but at the end of that assessment phase, when you've actually seen what a typical week looks like in their nutrition, you might not feel that guidelines would not benefit this individual. They are doing most of the things right on there. They're doing it majority of the time, but there's just elements of their intake that is actually holding them back. So this is why you might want to bring a food list technique in before a guideline technique and start with it earlier. In terms of Another time you might want to use it is if you've taken someone through the guideline journey. So you've focused over a series of weeks of slowly building up their guidelines. So making sure they're having 3 portions of protein a day, making sure their hydration levels are in the right cups per day, they've reduced their sugar, they've reduced their processed foods. So all those guidelines that we've set out in the nutrition guide, they've actually gone through a majority of them and doing them. So now what you want to do is, because we want to help continue them to progress and try and build a kind of an eating scenario which is where they're going to be able to achieve the maximal results and keep them progressing. We might move and transition them on to the Foodless technique, where we will take the time to actually go now into the detail in their choices and step by step look to see if there's any further improvements that they are willing to make themselves to take them to that next level. Why should we bother using the Foodless? It's quite a realistic question, because again, a lot of people do get a lot of successful guidelines. Some people prefer kind of meal plans. The Foodless technique does tend to sit in between the two options of those, and I think that's why I like it. I like it better than guidelines in terms of progression, because it allows for a detailed analysis. So in terms of guidelines, we just need to know roughly what they're having. With the Foodless technique, we need to go in a bit more detail. We need to know about portion sizes. We need to know how much they're having, and that's quite essential when it comes to coaching these people on Foodless and how to utilize it to their strengths. I also like it because there's a lot of people out there that do say to me when I'm kind of trying to support them on nutrition that my client's doing everything right, but they're not getting any results. And this is because on paper they look to be doing things right, but there's something missing there. And this is where this technique can take it to the next level and let us go into a bit of a deeper level in terms of providing quite specific advice that will get these people moving on. So in terms of the food list itself, there are 2 food lists. One's in the nutrition guide, and I sent the other one in the email last week, which was the advanced food list. Okay, I'm going to go through the advanced food list at the end and talk a bit more about how to use that. But in terms of the food list technique, I'm going to show you how to use it with the nutrition guide first. So in terms of the nutrition guide, it's just broken down into a series of key food groups, and within those key food groups there are key foods and examples of what they can have. Now, the food groups I've selected are meat, fish, poultry and eggs, healthy fats and oils, fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, permitted dairy, safe carbohydrates, pulses and drinks. So these are common food groups that people are familiar with. They're easy to get people to understand in terms of when you're giving advice around these groups. It's kind of not to the level that is beyond them and doesn't require really any level of education for your client to understand these. In terms of now using that food list and getting them to implement the actions, it can be done in 2 ways. So again, this comes to the coaching strategy, which is the stages 4 and 5 that we're going to go through today. Or there's the referral that I mentioned earlier, where the clients can use this as a resource to help them with meal planning, to help them with shopping. So it is structured to be used in any way you wish. So if you'd rather coach in a different way, you can still use this really well as a reference tool for clients when they're trying to do certain things themselves. So in terms of the actual Foodless coaching strategy, now it's broken down in 4 stages. I have a bit of a weird number system because it ties in with the guidelines pathway that we already have gone through. So on the handout that I gave you this week, you would have seen that I put some of the details on how it would look if you were to use a guideline, and how this could then interlink with that. So the first stage is the stage I do no matter what. I always say nutritional support should be provided with personal advice, and that should be from a client starting point. I went on a brilliant course this week when I was learning about kind of using coaching strategies, and one of the things that I already did that was kind of cemented on this course about how many times when we try and coach advice or give support, it's kind of more in the end range. We often forget about the client starting point. So I always say that the first thing is, if the only way we can get the clients moving forward is if we know where they currently are and learn where they want to go and find the graduated steps to get them there. So stage one isn't matter whatever technique I would use, whether I'm using guidelines, Foodless, meal planning, or any other specific coaching system that I've used in the past. It will always start in the same place, and that is an assessment phase. And that is to obtain the information. Now, the one that I still love to use, I still think it has its place. I've had conversations with this in the past, and it's centered around using the food journal. Now, the reason why I like it is very simple. Clients understand it, and it doesn't need to be complex. Now, in the past, I've gone from very, very complex food journals where people have to write everything down to now very simple ones. I find simpler gets more compliance, and I find it gives you a kind of a better picture that way. So in terms of the information I look for now when I do a food journal with a client is I just want to know what they're having. I don't need to know to the detail. In terms of in the past, I would have asked when it was bacon, where did they buy it, what quality it was. At this point in time, I'm really just trying to ascertain what they're currently having. On top of that, I want to know when they're having it. So that could be time of day, or it could just be whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Either way is fine for me. It just gives me an idea of what foods are grouped together and when they're having it. On top of that, I want to know how much of it. So portion size system, there's a variety of ways you can get them to track portion size. I use currently a lot of cup, tablespoons, and kind of things like fist-sized portions and whole foods as a way of coaching portion. Again, it's very easy with the client, not very complex, and I understand it and they understand it. And then the last thing, you might want to know why as well. So what I talk about when we're looking at why is getting them to identify when they're hungry, so hunger scores, getting them to know how healthy they feel after the meal. Do they feel energetic? Do they feel sluggish? Do they get headaches? You might even want to go down an energy aspect. But in terms of this side of it, I'd most probably look for it as more of an advanced client. So if a client comes to me with issues and I want to support them on it, that's what I want to know. If I've just got kind of a weight loss, someone wants to improve fitness, I might not want to go into that detail in that time, because I might want to try and support nutritionally first before I then look. And over time, getting to know your client, getting to talk to you, you might get this information anyway. But it's fine to include it at this point. But again, I'm looking for more from a compliance aspect of a food journal. So I want a client to fill it out more often, and the simpler I can make it, the better. Once I've, in terms of the technique, does it differ between the guideline one I show you and the Foodless one? It doesn't. I'm still looking for pretty much the same thing. I'm most probably a bit more picky that I want clear food portions on this one, and that I'll explain that more when we go into the assessment. But the technique really is the same. And I still would want a full 7 days before I look to assess it and give any coaching advice. So in terms of a timeline on this, I'd mostly get people to start post-consultation. I might check on it and taste up, but I wouldn't do any formal assessment until maybe the first or second session once it's been fully completed. Once we got past that stage, stage one, we then go to stage 4. So stage 2s and 3s are part of the guideline. So again, we might work through that first, but if we're not and we're going straight to the next one, we will jump in at stage 4. This is what we call the Foodless assessment. Now, the Foodless assessment is designed to identify 3 things in a client's nutritional day. The third one is the food group portions. So I want to know how much of each of the food groups they're currently eating. So for example, I'm going to use the meat example throughout this one. So 3 portions of protein per day is what I'm looking for. Can I pick those out? So that could be someone having eggs, bacon, and a steak in a day. So I'm just looking to see if they're checking my portion box in terms of the key items on the food list and where they're fitting. I would do it for all of them, and you might not necessarily want to do it daily. You could do it weekly. You could figure out an average. It's up to you. It's fine. It's kind of how you want to present this information back. But I would definitely make sure I like a daily option because it shows me variability. As well as the food group portions, so how many of each food group they're having. Also want to know how much are they having. Get a client's understanding of their portion size. For example, if I would take the eggs, 1 egg for me is half a portion. I wouldn't consider that a full portion. I would say 2 eggs equals a full portion. So again, it's breaking down the diary, seeing how much are they having. And what this can identify to you is, are they having enough food? So again, that could be a limiting factor. It's not necessarily people often think they're having too much of the wrong thing. Sometimes they're not just eating enough overall, especially if they've started to make changes themselves. The most common way that people make changes is through restriction. So they start cutting things out. So again, what that can do to people is make them undernourished and not getting enough nutrients in their day. The other aspect is it could show an imbalance, or it can also show too much consumption of something else that we might want to switch back. So again, for example, if we're not getting enough fish in the diet, we're having a bunch of red and white meat, we can educate that the client might need to, in terms of using the Foodless coaching system, start to reintroduce some fish and kind of balance it out from elsewhere. The third thing we can identify when we look for the Foodless assessment is the quality of the food. So again, this is through discussion, for sticking through the Foodless assessment, identifying if they're having things like processed foods, if they're having like bacon, what type is it? So for example, if we go with take steak, so if someone's just buying a processed high fat, low quality protein steak, you might want to be working through the quality. So you might want to identify if they're making the next step, are they having a nice good lean steak that might be kind of farmed in a certain way, or are we going to a high quality steak, a grass fed steak? So there's varying levels of quality in the food, and I always look to use the Foodless assessment, because this could be a point where yes, they're eating the right things, but is the quality there to match? So you might want to go down the route of actually asking these guys what sort of food choices they're making and providing support around that. So I would go through each day, each of the key food groups, and identify where things are sitting, and identifying where the current limitations are, whether it's within a food group, is the food group not enough, is there too much of a food group? Then what I would do is move into stage 5, which is Foodless planning, which is when we then use the Foodless to help coach and shift these imbalances to support their goal. So you would want to map out, it could either be on a daily basis, giving them targets, or over a weekly basis. And when I kind of explain a bit more about how I group the food groups and portions with them could be a thing. But what I would do is I'll be sitting down, and again, you wouldn't want to focus on everything. You would want to focus on one aspect at a time, but slowly shift that balance in a way that you want. So in terms of there's different ways you can go about this. So you can give what I call a daily example. So you can go down each day and say what you want them to be having. So for Mondays, you want them to choose between steak and eggs and lamb, so they get their red meat in. On Tuesdays, you can have poultry, turkey, and pork. So again, choose an option between white meat. And then on Wednesday, you can say, I want you to choose between salmon and tuna. So what you do there, you give them examples of what they can have on each day. So you create that balance you want. You create the right food structuring that you know will help them get their goals. But what you're not doing is telling them what to have. So they still have the choice of how to put this food together. And again, you're working with clients' likes and dislikes and any allergies that you might support, or not any in this case, but you're working through to identify ways that on a daily basis they could check in those boxes for you. As well as that, you could also do what we call so you would use, again, that's kind of using the food to identify. You might just want to use a more larger scale and just use the portions. So for example, I would sit down with my clients and say, I would want 1 portion of protein in every meal. Here's a list of you can have. You make the choices and go forward, and kind of work within those ranges and use graduated ways to sort of bring these up. So for other ones, in terms of the number systems that I use, so I ask for, when it comes to meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, I would want at least 1 portion of those per meal. Healthy fats and oils in the guide, I would want at least 1 portion of that per meal. Fruits, anywhere from 0 to 2 portions in a day. It just depends on your client. If they've got a large weight loss goal, you might not want to go heavily on the fruit, and then you'd also might want to get them to select from a subset, so stuff that is high in nutrients and kind of not at risk in terms of carbohydrates. So that kind of the next few food groups I go through, you'll find that they have stipulations. And remember, is the individual you're going to have to coach on this, and it's again working with them to identify the best. As well as fruits, vegetables, anywhere between 6 and 10 portions. If we're over 6, it's a plus, but I do like to be near the higher end when I coach. Nuts and seeds, anywhere between 0 to 2 portions. That could either be per day or per week. Again, if someone's showing severe health issues, I would not want to overdo the nuts and seeds, just mainly linked to the omega-6 ratio, and that's something I will coach on another recording. As well as that, we have permitted dairy. So again, 0 to 2. Again, weight loss, we know dairy is tied into insulinogenic responses. So again, if you've got someone weight loss and we're trying to control blood sugar and insulin levels, that might be something that we want to focus on controlling. Safe carbohydrates, so again, looking at maybe controlling how much portions of these we're having, again, or maybe restricting them to training days only. Again, it all comes down to the individual's goal and kind of where they're at and a bit about the individual in terms of where we set these. Pulses between 0 and 2. If we're dealing with a vegetarian or vegan, we might want to increase the allowance to make sure they're getting sufficient protein in per day or per week. And then drinks, the main thing I say with drinks is around 2 litres per day. We need to get fluids in our system. Again, this could shift depending on the size of an individual or how hard they're training. But I would always encourage at least 50% of someone's intake should be water, not in teas, coffees, or any flavoured form, just to make sure we get quality water in the body to help with some of the key metabolic processes that are going on. So again, we can use that structure, use those numbers to actually coach and work between, identify where they're not quite in those ranges. If they're over those ranges, how can we work that in and how can we support them to work that down? And the way we would do that is what we call a graduated response, graduated increases or reduces, and a practice that looks to help coach over a period of time. So I'm going to use client A example. So client A, she's consuming 6 portions of vegetables per day, which is great. It's over the guidelines, what we want. But those guidelines, what the guideline doesn't show is the makeup. And what we know from completing a journal and doing a Foodless assessment, 3 of those portions are from non-starchy sources and the other 3 are from starchy sources. We know that we want to continue someone to lose weight, and by controlling the starchy aspect of the vegetables in the client A's diet, we might be able to actually increase the weight loss, increase the shape change that their goal is by just increasing the amount of non-starchy vegetables. So what we would do is over a weekly series start to change the ratio. So in terms of, I would normally work this over, depending on the goal, either 1 to 2 weeks. For this example, we're going to do 2 weeks. So in the first 2 weeks, I would encourage the client to start to actually increase their vegetable intake. So try and push them towards the 10. What we know this will happen will impact other choices they make in the day and actually make them feel full after most meals. So what we would do is expect them to consume anywhere between 4 to 5 portions of non-starchy vegetables and 2 to 3 portions of starchy vegetables. That slowly increased them, but we still haven't changed too much in terms of what they're having. After that, if we're successful in that, in weeks 3 to 4, we then make the next step. This is when I'd increase them to 5 to 6 non-starchy vegetables, but then start to bring the starchy vegetables down to 1 to 2. So what this again is doing is allowing that you're not taking anything away, you're actually putting stuff in, but you're just changing the ratio of what they're having. In weeks 5 to 6, if we're still seeing successful changes, we might then look to say at least 6 non-starchy servings per day and above. What we're then also to say is that they can have between 0 and 2 starchy vegetables per day. So again, because they're getting the starchy vegetables, we don't see any reliance on the starchy form. After that, in terms of we're seeing success in that the change might not necessarily be anything to the volume, but it also could be the time frame they're having it. So again, we can maybe increase to 6 to 8 non-starchy servings per day, depending on what they're doing, and 0 to 2 starchy servings, but only on training days only. So we know that it'll have a refueling purpose. And this is just linked into how the body will utilize carbohydrates. So again, that's a nice graduated response that you can work through on people to actually get them to their goal. And hopefully those small changes that are agreed with the client will actually prove to have a massive effect. In terms of, that's great as a framework and something that you can understand and work to, but remember in the last webinar I talked about SMARTs. SMARTs was how I deliver guidelines and targets. So everyone knows SMART, the S on the end was something unique, and that's what I call support. It's all good and well telling how, like giving the framework, but sometimes you might need to show them how they can do this. So the supports for this one, so when we set 5 non-starchy servings vegetables per day, we can use the Foodless to direct them to these choices. So things like peppers, onions, mushrooms, courgettes, lettuce, asparagus, spinach, and say pick at least 5 from that list. So again, The client gets to choose, so they're more willing to, but what you're doing is you're actually coaching them in terms of selecting the range that you want to help produce to get you to your goal. Okay. After we've done the food list planning, next step to go through is continuous tracking. Now, we need to make sure that whenever we set any targets, we need to make sure we continue to track it. If we're not, we don't know how we can progress to the next step. We don't know if they're doing right. Now, in terms of food journal is the easiest way to sort of still monitor the portions. So I would still encourage the client to fill the form out. What you'll get in the handout to follow with this is a specific style of journal that is suited to the food list technique. So as well as having a column to list the foods and what they're having, there's also a column to track their progress in terms of their targets. So if the target is portion, it's an out of 3, so they can try and make sure they're consuming 3. So what it does, it's a way to help support and coach using the journal as a way to keep them tracking. So I would continue to do this as long as necessary until I feel someone is in a range that they're happy to stick to. It is part and part of their daily eating now, and they're still getting the results that they want. In terms of what I mentioned at the start is how this would be used for the advanced food list. Now, the advanced food list is something that I do actually use myself. It's a little bit more complex compared to the nutrition guide one, so you might want to start people with the nutrition guide but then progress onto the more complex advanced food list. It's just because it has more choice on there, which is great because it gives a bit more variety, so people can select more choices when they're actually putting meals together, and it also gives you a really great level of way to more coaching capacity. So a great way not only to actually provide the support in terms of the targets that they're working to, but in terms of you also have the ability to educate around how these food choices are combined together through the list structure. So the advanced food list is broken down into 3 sections, which is your everyday, occasional, miscellaneous and hydration. The last one mainly focuses on things like herbs, spices and water, a little bit more information about how to do that. The everyday and the occasional, the everyday foods are foods that will help support their goals that they can consume every day, or they should be consuming every day to help them towards that. Occasional are foods that still have a place in their eating, but might need to be either controlled in either frequency or portion size because they could have an effect in terms of what they can achieve. The occasional and the everyday sections are also divided into further 3 sections, which is your carbohydrates, fats and proteins. So this is a great way to actually start to work with your clients and get them to understand differences between the foods, where they would actually sit, and how to play around the combinations to fit maybe things like their body type, their how they like to eat, how they feel, and it's an easy way to coach this because it's nicely laid out, and the client will start to be able to put food together themselves through the system because they understand the best way it is for them to eat. So again, in terms of the food plate out there, I'm not a big fan of it, but I like the idea behind it. So using the advanced food list and the idea of the food plate to draw out and structure how the food should go together. So how much of your plate should be of everyday foods. It could be everyday proteins or everyday carbs, everyday fats or occasional fats. It's just a great way for them to see how it comes together. And it's something that I do with my clients in terms of a coaching session. Now, the advanced food list is great from a perspective of giving advice. You can even get more direct advice to them. I say the main limitation around it is that it can be quite complex if you're trying to assess by it. So I would mainly stick to an assessment using kind of the food list in terms of the nutrition guide, and maybe use just the advanced food list to actually coach and provide the graduated increases that you're looking for. Okay. In terms of that is the webinar on Foodless. What I want to chance now for you guys is if you've got any questions for me on Foodless or any questions on nutrition that you want me to answer in today's webinar, just write them in the box on the side. So while you guys are doing that, if you've got questions for me, I did kind of think of a few additional questions that are quite common and that people might want to ask about the food list. So the first one is, what if clients don't get on with Foodless? Now, that could mean one or two things: that the client might need more advice, more direct advice. There might be someone that responds best for meal planning. Now, I'm planning to do a webinar on meal planning and how to do that yourself and how to do it the right way. But you could also have a client that you might think is right for Foodless, but don't get on with it. So what they might want is some easier guidelines to follow. So again, identifying where the issue is, asking if they commit to it. If they are saying, yeah, I can sort of do that, then you might need to make it easier, and then go, can you do that? And they're like, yes, I can. And then build it back up. Another question is, what if a client questions foods on the list? So that's one common thing you do get from Foodless. People say, well, why isn't bread on the list? This is why I say key to having a positive food list is the thing. To just say, these are the foods that are going to help you towards your goal. It's not a list to identify which is good and bad foods. It's just these foods should be consumed on a daily basis to support your development. And by having that mindset, we avoid the negativity that comes with what I call kind of very common in weight loss support groups to actually use black and white food lists. These are your healthy foods, these are your bad foods, these are your red foods, these are your green foods. So all all that kind of mindset around it. And again, you might have experienced it in your clients, and I do today when I try and coach them about a new way of how to eat and put foods together, that we see people turn around and go, well, that was bad for me. And I'm like, there's no food bad for you. It's just an understanding of how food comes together and interacts with the body. So this is the thing. We don't want to go down that route of a positive and negative aspect. Just focus on, these are the foods, if we include, will help you towards your goal. This will prevent things like barriers and poor eating habits that can be formed, that I'm having to work with a lot of clients at the moment, more than I do with their choices. The other thing is we can create craving mindsets. So this is when an individual, if you tell them not to have something, all they do is want it, and they come up with these reasons why they can have it and excuses. So again, we want to avoid that scenario. The other one is the punishment and reward mindset. So in terms of like, I can have that because I've been good all week, so that makes all the food I've had in the week really bad for me, didn't like it. When it's quite the reverse, you speak to most people that actually enjoy their food in the week. It's just this mindset of saying this food's bad has been created. So it's trying to get out of that and kind of have a real positive focus on the right foods. And as I always say, you want to really focus on inclusion rather than restriction. So if you do have to reduce something, take something away, reintroduce something to help support it. Or if you know that you want something to come out of someone's nutritional day, what you need to make sure you do is you focus on putting food in first, so it makes them feel fuller and not want to go for these extra foods. What if it's not working? So what you've tried in the food list, it's not working. You've tried guidelines, I'm still not seeing any results. What's actually happening? And this is where we need what I say is a more detailed assessment. There is something going on either in their daily eating or their health that is stopping them. And it might need you to have a more structured support mesh structure in place. So again, the meal plan to actually help support them on this. The other reason could be that they might need what we call a prescriptive diet, which is something as trainers we really can't coach on, where this is an underlying health issue that needs to be resolved first, which could be resolved nutritionally, but we need to understand the assessments linked in with it, which is not something we do, and it becomes a bit more of a therapeutic method of using food. So there are a subset of people that will need to go see specialists, and it might not be an area you can support, but as long as we work through all the systems and tools at our hands, we can hopefully get people as close as we can to this. All right, the last question I've got for you guys is, what if the client has issues with food? And it's quite common. Clients say, oh, I don't like vegetables, I don't like this. And it can be quite a brick wall to come up against. And this is where I use a technique called Foodless personalization. So this is when I sit down with my clients, take the food list I've got, but personalize it for them. So you sit down, write out all the carbohydrate sources that you like, write out all the protein sources you like, write out all the fat sources that you like to have. And then because they see the list of things they like, it becomes very easy for them to implement and to coach and to use. But it also gives you an opportunity to discuss why they don't like foods. Why don't you like vegetables? Is there a reason behind it? Is there a way we can try and support this? It could be the fact that they've never tried it and they've said, oh, I don't like it, but I've never tried it. So trying to encourage clients to retry old foods and retry new foods to see if things change, especially if you achieve a lot of success with the guidelines. Their taste might start changing, and food that tasted blanding in the past might start tasting nicer. So in terms of the other thing, that opportunity that gives you, I think that's it actually. Yeah, it's just a way for them to encourage them to actually learn how to use the foods and try the foods and introduce things. Now, we've got 1 minute left, guys. So if you've got no more questions, I'm going to leave it there for today. I will send a replay out of this webinar, and I'll also send out a handout with the information I've covered today and some resources that you can use if you want to coach it. If you do have any questions for me, please don't feel free to either email me or contact me by phone, and we'll be able to discuss things. But if there's no more questions, and thanks for taking time out to come today, guys, and hope to see you on the next webinar.